Hello, I'm Derek Townsend. I'm in your IT354 class. This is video 3, and I will be covering objects and all the things involving objects. This is a very broad overview. Very broad overview. We're going to be covering dot notation, bracket versus bracket notation. What else? We're going to be covering object literals, object constructors, classes. Basically, a lot of ways to build objects in JavaScript. So our first lesson will focus on basically objects like what is a basic object constructions using new object. I haven't used it too often, but I know it is used sometimes for like if you want a very fresh variable that you know, like a fresh object declaration that is empty, or a for an empty object variable. Okay, let's start off with this. Make sure everything's encompassed out. So for objects, we have, this is the first, like in order to create an object right here, we take the name, set it equal to new.object, and we'll essentially create an empty object, which is this. Just two empty curly braces with nothing in it. And what we're trying to do is fill that with key value pairs. And we would use an object most likely when we want to have something that have something we want to represent something that has multiple characteristics and multiple characteristics. So if if we wanted to look at an airplane another way, it would go like we want to see all let's say we want to keep track of like all the missions used, which will be an array, and we want to also have the model number, and we want to have the technical name, and we have the nickname and what it's known for. We want to have all these things. But the only way, if we were to store them, another solution would come to mind is like an array filled with each of the information. But that violates two kind of principles we like to use, where we like to keep our arrays all the same data type, at least in general. I know you can do it in JavaScript. Other languages don't let you do it, but for JavaScript, it allows you to do it. But it's not. I don't recommend it. Versus, but the problem with that is that you would need to know at each index what the value is. So if we were to do things like I said, it's like we would need to have an array inside of an array of like missions completed, mission 1, mission 2, stuff like that. And then we would have model number, which would be like 230 or 230 or 230, yeah. And then we would have the technical name and everything else. And we would have the nickname of a 10 warthog. And this array does work. It's just you would need to remember what each of these represented index, like the data type and everything, and it kind of gets messy very, very quickly. And I don't recommend using it on most occasions. It's easier just to use an object at that point. So basically, we're taking something we want to represent in the real world with multiple characteristics and multiple data types, and simplifying it oh oh wait, yeah, no, that hasn't been created yet. Let me just comment that out real quick. I just want to run it and show you what it looks like. It's not. I need to console log it. Hold up. .log. Yeah, as you see, JavaScript does accept it, but it would be difficult to keep track of all these under most circumstances. So it's just easier to create an object. An object essentially has this. So we have the key and value pair of an object. And the way a key and value is represented in JavaScript or like a key value is represented inside an object would be like key inside of curly braces right here, key value. So keep that in mind. So we have the key of technical name and the value of Fairchild Republic A10 Thunderbolt 2. And this is done in dot notation, which is different to bracket notation, but not by much. bracket notation, essentially, if you look at nickname right here, it's very similar to dot notation, except the bracket notation can allow you to put in variable names. So here we have the technical name right here and the technical name right here. But here we are declaring the technical name as a variable first. And just to make sure that it does work when we run, I'm going to uncomment out this function. By the way, this is how you include functions in it. This with dot notation. This right here is how you do it in bracket notation, but I've had inconsistent results with it, and I had a solution to both, but I could be misremembering, but like I literally had an error earlier when I was working with this and did it this way. Did it this way. But yeah, let's have the console log run up here. So we run this. Fairchild Republic A10 Thunderbolt A, etc., etc. You know, like also known as A10 Warthog. So, and if we were to comment this back out, this would still have the same result. Literally nothing changed. So just same way of declaring the same thing. I can do it again here. Oops, sorry. I can do it again here and uncomment these both out. Comment this one out. And it still works. So the problem arises, or like not really a problem. The most interesting thing about it is that with the Fairchild Republic, with the airplane or whatever, right? We're gonna want to add some functionality to it, which we see here. That is printing out the technical name, the nickname. This is essentially the way the function works. And we're using show details equals function. And this is what I mean by like it's sometimes working. Like when I tried this earlier, it did not work. But now that I'm gonna do it again here, and I'm pretty sure it'll work. Or maybe it'll give me an error again. Who knows? And it worked. Okay, thankfully. Oh wait, no. As undefined. Ooh, wait, where is that coming from? Oh yes, I commented out both nicknames. That's why. Yeah, okay, that's back. But yeah, we can pretty much skip this section. If you get an error, you can just choose to write it here, like write it this way. But now this seems to be working, so I'm just more confused. Let's see, known for going bird. Da, da, da. If you know this plane, it's just kind of just a meme. Um, so yeah, let's move on to the object literals. Oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to talk about now before I blacked out. Yeah. So technical name, like remember how I mentioned you can put in variable names with bracket notation. That is most useful in like when you have input forms and you have like an if statement checking like which input form they are currently typing into and stuff like that. I use it a lot in React whenever I'm handling my inputs and making sure that what the user's typing in isn't inappropriate or like I can't accept that data, so I can let them know immediately and stop them from entering it. So yeah, I recommend it for that. But like the overall difference, it's kind of all semantic to be honest. It's just like I prefer either. Excuse me. I prefer either one. I've used both. Both have their places, but it honestly makes no difference most of the time. All right, let's move on. Oops, shit. Let's re-comment this all out. I apologize for yawning. I am a bit tired. Yeah. So object literals. Very simple, very straightforward way of writing objects. You just write out your key value pairs instead of like defining them with bracket notation. You can add on to them later, but it doesn't matter. It's so you have if you want to add a function, this is the only really unique thing about it, is that you have to use get when you're defining your functions out. I think you can also just use the function keyword. Let me check. Let's just do this normally to make sure that it works and then do function. There's some way to write this that like it works. Can't quite remember. Not quite, but close. Oh wait, is this now gonna work? Let's see. Okay, that's it. You could write it as an autonomous function, and it still will print it out. But the get is a bit easier because you don't have to put the parentheses in front of it to invoke it like a function. You can use get and it'll when you type dot intro it'll work, which can be a bit confusing, I guess. But because like normally this would signal like, hey, you're activating a function when you do it like with the curly braces or parentheses, I mean. But it's not really different. Oh yeah, and it will error out if you try and put parentheses after. You know it's a function, but it's not a function. Almost, it's weird. I've I've never I didn't know about Git before then. I haven't put in functions in this way. Put functions into my objects this way, except when I'm using classes. But yeah, so once again, key value pair is written out normally. You have or this function is literally just console log the value of this dot first name and this dot last name. So yeah, not much to talk about with object literals. I find them that they are the most common. I like using them. Um, it's a bit easier than new object, which requires just a few extra steps. And I feel like the code gets less clean. And I don't know. It's heavily preference based, or like whatever your job tells you to do. Now we have object constructors, which hint at the underlying JavaScript behind classes. So it's just like it's essentially just a constructor that you would see in other languages, but it's but you're building it as an object. So we have the user function dot user or function user, and it's just checking the status of recording. And essentially, like when we use like instead of doing object new or new object, we would do new the function name, which in this case is user because that's the object we are creating in this time. So it takes a name, email, date of birth month, date of birthday, date of birth year, and here we are generating. We are essentially assigning the value of ID. This is just something I do to make sure like when you're dealing with data from backend, you're usually going to have an ID to keep track of that you're going to reference at different times, or like to keep track of what object you are currently dealing with, really, and what just it's it's something that like when you're working with databases, it's nice to have. And we have this dot name because this is referring to the essentially doing the same thing as the dot notation was doing before. We're doing this dot name. So this object's name key is referring to the value of the name that is being taken in from the parameter list. And it's doing the same thing with email, date of birth month, date of birth year, date of birth day, date of birth year. Then we have the function here, this dot intro. It's very similar to what we've seen before, and it's console logging all this information. And we run it right here, user.intro. It'll introduce yourself to Michael. And here we're just typing in all the information. It's yeah, so this is very similar to a class object, which we'll be getting into right here, which is I chose to like the classes are essentially syntactic sugar. They were introduced in ES6. They are basically just functions. They are I mean, excuse me. They are essentially just objects with cleaner code and a little bit more functionality added under the hood. Because originally, as I said earlier, or I'm not sure if this was this video or the other video, um, it does not. JavaScript was not designed originally with object-oriented programming in mind. It was originally used just for purely scripting or like making things work in HTML and CSS and adding functionality and making buttons do a thing in 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 that language in HTML and CSS. But gradually it's grown to do a lot more and really get into object oriented stuff and making fetch requests to the back end and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, it's changed a lot. It's changed quite a bit. And now it's fairly useful all around. it also does a lot of stuff it probably shouldn't do. Is the feeling I'm starting to get from it. So yeah, but yeah. So as we said, this was called a constructor literal, or what is it? A object constructor. This is essentially the same thing right here. Also, side note, yeah, classes also used to have like rely on something called prototypical inheritance, and had a lot of underlying had a lot of it made the code a lot less clean and readable, but once again simplified to just class rectangle like you would see in so many other programs and JavaScript. Like what language do you use class just outright? I think Ruby does it. I haven't yeah I haven't coded outside of JavaScript in a little bit, but yeah, height. So we have this dot height equal to height. Same thing. This referring to this height referring to this rectangle. This class's height, and then this dot width referring to this class's width. And we have the two functions that don't even have the declaration that are essentially just doing some calculation for us, calculating the area and perimeter of this rectangle. And it'll print out what we need, like this. So this is the perimeter, this is the rectangle, or perimeter, and this is the perimeter, this is the area. And yeah, this is pretty much it. The code kind of cleans itself up. It doesn't confuse too much. It's pretty straightforward, if I'm being honest. Uh, this can be applied. Essentially, we're taking something based in the real world. Once again, just to recap, we are taking something like a rectangle, and we are trying to take all the features that we can't normally store in an array or anything like else, and condensing it down to like an object with key values that like dictate how it works. And just to prove that like this rectangle is still a rectangle, like an object under the hood. Let's just do this. Or will it give me a class? It might do something funny. I haven't tested this. But yeah, it's essentially just like a rectangle object. You can tell the slight difference, and it tells you height, width, and it's very similar, but all ultimately kind of all the same. All right, thank you for your time. Yeah.